Throughout history, many countries have had to fight for their freedom. Before America was an independent nation, it was a group of colonies. These colonies were controlled by England. Many of the colonies who had risked their lives to cross the Atlantic and who had worked so hard to establish a new life in America did not want to be governed by the British government anymore. Because England controlled the American colonies, there were many disadvantages for the colonists living there. First, the colonists didn't have self-government. They couldn't make their own laws and their own form of government. And although England had control over the colonies didn't have any representatives in the British government. Many colonists thought this was unfair. Another disadvantage of British control was that the American colonies were only permitted to trade with England. People living in the colonies wanted to trade with other countries too, so this was a huge economic limitation. Finally, many colonists were unhappy because the British government forced them to pay high taxes. This was another economic hardship that the American colonies had to face. In 1770, many people in America began to protest England's power over the colonies, and 3 years later, the frustration that many colonies felt reached a breaking point. In 1773, England created a law that said the colonists must pay a tax on tea. Tea was very important to the colonists, and most people drank tea every day. By the 1760s, colonists were consuming 1.2 million pounds of tea a year. Now the British said there would be taxes on all the tea, and they would require the colonists to send this tax to England. In December of 1773, 3 British ships with boxes of tea arrived in the port of Boston, Massachusetts. Angry about the tea tax they had to pay, the colonists in Boston refused to accept the tea and told the ships to return to England. The British king said that the colonists must accept the tea and must also pay the tea tax. Some of the colonists made a decision to take action. One night they dressed in Native American clothes and went on to the British ships that were still in the harbor. They threw nearly 350 boxes of British tea into the water, destroying them. This event was called the Boston Tea Party. It was one of the most famous protests in American history, and it brought the American colonies one step closer to a war with England. After the Boston Tea Party, more conflicts and fighting continued. In 1774, the colonists had an important meeting in Pennsylvania called the First Continental Congress. At this meeting, representatives from colonies discussed their problems. They were preparing for a revolution. Thomas Jefferson wrote an important document that announced the colonists' desire for independence. This document, called the Declaration of Independence, said the people of America wanted free and independent states. It said they did not want to be controlled by England any longer. The Declaration of Independence also said that all men are created equal and that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. War between the American colonies and England began in 1775. This war, called the Revolutionary War, lasted until 1783. General George Washington led the American army. The army didn't have enough food, clothing, supplies, or ammunition. The Americans lost many battles, but eventually they won the war. One reason they won was George Washington's ability to strategize. He fought in a very different style than the British. British soldiers attacked in a long line. Washington's army, on the other hand, hid behind trees and attacked their enemy. Even though the British had better food, clothing, and equipment, they couldn't defeat Washington's strategy. During the Revolutionary War, all kinds of Americans fought or contributed help. Farmers, sailors, business owners, and teachers became soldiers. About 5,000 African Americans fought the Yiddish. Women also gave assistance. They worked on the farms while the men were fighting. They also grew food, made clothes for the army, and took care of injured soldiers. Other countries, such as France, also helped the Americans by sending soldiers or supplies. On July 4, 1776, the American colonies adopted the Declaration of Independence. Representatives from all 13 colonies signed the paper. The war was not finished yet, but this was the beginning of the United States as an independent nation. This is why we celebrate Independence Day in the U.S. every year on July 4th. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty in Paris in September 1783.